Hey cats, what's happening? They call these the dog days of summer. It goes back to the Romans. Early Romans had to do with the star Sirius and that astrology stuff. But it was the hottest part of summer and they called it the dog days. Now look at this. More storm debris. Every time I get this stuff cleaned up, there's more. This one is really stabbed into the ground tight. But anyway, I was going to show you back here. There was one bigger tree that fell a couple weeks ago during a storm, and it came, we call this the alley back here, but it fell right across the whole area here. So I brought the chainsaw back and I was cleaning it up, and you'll see where I was cutting there. And I felt something on my cheek and it hurt. So right away, instinctively, I just turned and ran. Didn't even think twice about it. And then I kind of crept back here thinking, okay, what's going on? Why did I get stung? Was there something going on here? And sure enough, I didn't see anything right away, but when I banged on this tree right here, back in there somewhere, there is a yellow jacket nest, and they came swarming out of there. I see a couple flying around there right now, so I'm getting out of here before I get stung again. But that thing stung me right on the side of the cheek, and boy, it hurt. And it hurt for a couple of days. Now, thank goodness I'm not allergic to bee stings, so it wasn't serious or anything, but it just caused me a lot of pain. So I got more work to do, and it's hot. I mean, okay, my brother lives out in Lone Pine, California, and it's like over 100 degrees. That's pretty hot. That's a dry heat. But around here, it's like 85 degrees, and it is so humid. I mean, I thought about mowing the grass, but here it is like mid-afternoon, and the grass is still soaking wet. It never dries out all day long because of the humidity here. I was thinking back again, reminiscing to when I was a kid. And I was probably 15, 16, and maybe even 17 years old this went on. But, the phone call would come in. We didn't have a cell phone back then. We had the rotary phone, and we had a yellow one in the kitchen that hung on the wall. And when the phone rang, generally my mom would answer the phone because she was always right there in the kitchen. And it was always dreaded when that phone call came after lunch sometime, usually. And my mom would say, "They want you down at the farm. They're going to be baling hay today." Oh, I hated to hear those words. That meant it was going to be a really rough day. So I get on a motorcycle or a bicycle or whatever, or drive the car, head over to the farm. Now, during those days, there were 3 Arabian horse farms, all within a few miles of each other. And the one farm was a pretty big Arabian horse farm. And we worked there most of the time, but they would dole us out to the other farms as we were needed too, because we were the grunt labor. So if one of the other farms really needed some help, that's where we had to go. Now on hay cutting day, the temperature had to be right, the humidity level had to be right. They preferred a dry day. The hay field would be cut by the farmhand and left to dry for a while, and then they would ted the hay, which is, I think they run a machine over it that kind of crimps it and squeezes some of the moisture out of it and helps it to dry faster. And then they would rake it into big rows up and down the field. This machine just would throw it up and rake it into great big, thick rows of hay. By the time we got there, they were just finishing up the raking, and they'd pull the baling machine out of the barn, and the farm owner would usually run the baler. That was his pride and joy. It was his baby. It was an old rickety New Holland baler. It always needed some TLC, and he wanted to make sure that he was the one giving it that TLC. We had 3 wagons, 3 hay wagons normally. 2 of them were pulled with tractors, and the third one was pulled with a little white Jeep. So the guys that pulled the lucky straw got to drive the tractor over to the field that we were going to cut, and the rest of us would just jump on the wagon and ride over there. Now, as soon as you got to the field, they were already baling hay, and the bales were flopping onto the ground. And the process was, you get those bales picked up as quick as you can, because it was all about moisture. You didn't want moisture getting into the bales. You didn't want them sitting on the ground very long. Some of those bales weighed generally around 50 pounds. They were pretty heavy when you had to pick up one after the other. And I always had to grab hold of the thing, lift it up, bump it up with my knee to get it up onto the wagon, because some of them could weigh over 60, 70 pounds or more, depending on the moisture content in them and the size of the bale. Now, the baler kind of shot out the same size bales most of the time, but every once in a while, for some odd reason, it would throw out a great big long bale or a little short bale. So, yeah, anyway, there was a farmhand that worked there, and he was a rough old cowboy. He must have come from Texas or something. He wore the plaid shirt, he had the pearl buttons, he had the cowboy hat, he had the red bandana, and the cowboy boots with the pointy toes, the whole shot. He was the real deal. And he was a hardcore worker. He was the main farmhand there. And he would get up there and stack the hay on the wagons and keep, barking orders to us to hurry up and feed him hay, So we'd be throwing bales up on that wagon as fast as we could. Well, one day he yells at me, he says, "Get up on the wagon here, I'm going to show you how to stack hay on a wagon." I didn't argue with him. You never argued with him. You did exactly what he told you to do. Like I said, he was hardcore. He meant business. So I jumped up on the wagon, and he said, "Listen to me and pay attention. I'm going to show you how to stack this, and then from now on, you're stacking the wagons." Okay, well, I listened, and he showed me the whole method. Each layer has a certain way that it's stacked, so that each layer interlocks together, so that once you left the field and headed out on the road to go back to the barn, you weren't going to lose a bale. Those bales were pretty valuable to them, and they wanted to save every last one. If anybody were to break a bale accidentally, they usually caught a little bit of grief for it. You'd at least get yelled at to be a little more careful with the bales. So I got up on the wagon, and he showed me how to stack, and I picked it up pretty easily. Now, one of the things I learned was, when we were baling, sometimes we'd be on the side of a hill. So, the wagon could be going along the side of the hill, kind of on a slant. And you didn't want to stack the hay straight up and down to the ground. You wanted to stack it perpendicular to the wagon. So if the wagon was on the side of a hill, you'd be stacking the hay kind of slanted too, because then when you got out on the road and the wagon leveled out, your load would be level. So there was a little trick to it, and you had to pay attention when you were stacking and kind of have a good eye for it, I guess. But I turned out to be an excellent wagon stacker. Now, we could stack them 8 high, which meant 8 layers of bales. And at that level, you could barely make it under the telephone wires out on the road. So on the way back to the barn, If you had to ride on the wagon to get back to the barn, you had to watch out for wires and pretty much lay down or hang off the side of the wagon while the wires went over your head. On the way out of the field one day, one of the kids was driving the tractor. Because I had been stacking the hay, I was sitting at the front of the load, and this wagon did not have a front bar on it, so it was just the whole thing was a perfect stack. And there was like a little mogul or a hill in the field, and he went over that with the tractor, and for some reason, I don't know, instead of just leaving it in low gear and just crawling over it and keep rolling, he decided to, once he got over the hill, to like push in the clutch and hit the brakes. And the wagon jerked forward, and half of the load went right towards the tractor. I went with it. I fell down between the tractor and the wagon and probably had about 30 bales of hay on top of me. So I was pinned, I couldn't move, and I was just praying that the kid, wouldn't let off the clutch and start driving the tractor. I probably would have got crushed under the wagon. Fortunately, he stopped, he shut off the tractor, and the other guys ran to my rescue and pulled all the bales off, and I was able to get out of there, and then I had to restack that load, and we got a different driver for the tractor and made it back to the farm. Now, back at the farm, the horse farm had what they call an arena barn, and the arena barn is like it's like a big arena. It's like a great big open dirt area where they can run horses around in there. If it was raining or something like that, they could have a horse show inside the arena barn. And so we'd pull all of the hay wagons inside the arena barn, and that way they would stay dry in there. And then one by one, the farmhand, the old cowboy, he knew how to back up a hay wagon. And he could back that hay wagon right up into the barn, right up the ramp, right into the barn, and it was ready. The hay was ready to get stacked up in the hay mow. That was about the worst part of the day. Now, you would think that throwing the bales up on the wagon was hard, which it was very hard, but up in the top of the barn there, it was definitely probably 100 degrees or more. I was the stacker, so I had to be assigned to go up into the hay loft and stack the hay as it came up there. Now, they had a conveyor belt set up, and the guys would offload the wagons and just keep throwing the bales onto the conveyor belt, and I'd probably have somebody up there with me, and they'd pull the bales off of the conveyor and pitch them over to me, and I would take them and sock them in place and stack them tight in there. And then after we were told that we had to stack each layer one at a time. So I'd do a layer, and then you had to throw rock salt over that layer of hay, and then you could start stacking the next layer. The rock salt absorbed the moisture out of the hay, because I don't know if you have any experience with hay or barns, but wet hay can cause what they call spontaneous combustion. The wet hay begins to get moldy, and it starts to create like heat energy, and it can get so hot that it can catch on fire. It can actually burn the whole barn down, and a lot of barns have been burned to the ground from that spontaneous combustion. So you had to make sure that the hay was salted down every layer and stacked just right. And I would be sweating profusely. Well, there was a girl that lived on the farm there. She was one of those Asian Americans, cute little girl, and her job was to make iced tea, and she would make it by the jugs full. And then she would bring out this cold iced tea by the gallon jugs, and they always handed one up to me on the conveyor belt. And while I was up there stacking hay in the hayloft, I would drink that whole gallon of iced tea, because I was just sweating it out as fast as I was drinking it. When the job was done, it was somewhat rewarding. We felt pretty proud of our accomplishment for the day. And then at the end of the day, by then it was already dusk or turning dark, you know, because it was a lot of work. It took a lot of effort. They'd invite us over to the farmhouse. Now, the owners lived in a mansion over on the other side of the property, but the farmhand had a big old farmhouse there that he lived in. And they had a great big screened in back porch, and they had a big picnic table in there, big long picnic table. And they'd invite us all in there, and they'd always have this big spaghetti dinner for us when we were done baling hay. And we'd eat like kings. And the crusty old farmhand would become our best friend because he would have all of us laughing, telling us stories and spinning tales. And it was a time that I remember that was very hard, but very memorable at the same time. And I don't know, there's sometimes in my life I'd give anything to be back in those days when I was young and spry and could work my butt off all day like that. And those were different times. Well, that's my spin on today. That's my story. I got to get busy again. I see, you know, I've got the messes to clean up in the yard, and my wife's going to be wondering what the heck happened to me here. So I'm going to head back down, pick up the chainsaw, and break into a sweat. Till next time, cats. I'll catch you all later.